I bought an apartment during a market slump, $30,000 below what others had paid for the same layout. I had just finished moving in when Linda Carver, the neighbor across the hall, stormed over. Same unit, same building, yet you paid $30,000 less than we did. You need to make up the difference. I froze for a second. She took it as fear and raised her voice. If you had the guts to snap it up cheap, you'd better be ready to compensate the rest of us. Otherwise, don't expect to live here in peace. I looked at her, so self-righteous it was almost absurd, and I laughed. I had just been discharged from a psychiatric hospital. Threatened me. If anyone wasn't going to live in peace, it was her. I stared at the middle-aged woman with tight curls, who had just barged through my door, demanding I pay her $30,000 to make up the difference. All the excitement of finally buying a place vanished. Ma'am, volatility and housing prices is just how the market works, I said, keeping my voice as steady as I could. The previous owner needed a quick sale, and I happened to catch it. That has nothing to do with you. She stepped closer, her voice turning sharp. How does it have nothing to do with me? Same layout, same building. So, why did you pay $30,000 less than I did? Annoyance simmered under my skin. I remembered what the doctor told me. When I was discharged, when conflict comes up, take a deep breath first, then reason it out. I took a slow breath for you. The market was at its peak when you bought your unit. When I bought mine, prices had dropped. That's not on me. If we follow your logic, then if prices go up another $50,000 next year, are you going to pay me the difference? She planted her hands on her hips. Don't try to confuse me with all that nonsense. We live on the same floor. How can you feel okay taking advantage like that? My son's getting married soon. We need the money. You bought it cheap, so you make up the difference. If you don't fix this, don't expect to live here in peace. I let out a short laugh, irritation bubbling over. Before I could respond, she suddenly lunged toward my luggage, reaching straight for my bag. Where's the money? Hand it over. $30,000 and not a cent less. A flash of anger shot through me. How could someone be this unreasonable? I was just about to pull out my phone and dial 911. The moment she saw what I was doing, she spun around and headed back to her unit. As she left, she tossed over her shoulder. If you don't pay up, we'll see how long you last here. I gave a cold laugh and ignored her, shutting the door behind me. That afternoon, I went downstairs to Harper's corner store to pick up some essentials.
Nice. Harper.
The owner, in her 50s, scanned me up and down before asking, "You just moved in 6th floor?" I nodded. She glanced outside, then lowered her voice. "Linda Carver, from 601, just posted in the resident group chat, saying you bought the place to run some kind of shady business." I froze.
What? She sighed.
You got that apartment cheap. Their family can't accept it. She pulled up the chat and showed me. The messages were filthy. Linda Carver, at everyone. What do you reckon the woman, who just moved into the 6th floor, does for a living? I've lived for over 50 years. I know how to read people. What decent young woman lives alone in a place that expensive? You all know what that means. Now that you say it, yeah, that's suspicious. Where would such a young girl get that kind of money? Those kinds of gigs out there pay fast. Don't let her ruin the atmosphere of this place.
Heard she's not bad looking.
That makes it even more likely. Anyone got her contact? Just curious.
Haha.
Not gonna do anything? Denise shook her head. They drove out the last person who lived in your unit the same way. Even calling the police didn't help. They won't cross the line. They just make your life miserable every single day. As she handed me my things, asked her to add me to the group chat. Sweetheart, just between us. If you can tolerate it, then tolerate it. Otherwise, leave as soon as you can. I took my things from her, holding back my irritation, and thanked her. Well, I wasn't afraid. I had just spent my entire savings on that apartment. Leave let out a silent, cold laugh. It was the first time I'd ever heard of someone trying to force a psychiatric patient out of her own home. When I got back upstairs, I saw a plastic bag hanging from my doorknob. Inside was a dead rat. There was a note in the bag. "This is the first time. Next time it'll be alive." I scoffed, tied the bag shut, and tossed it right back at Linda's door. I dealt with plenty of rats before. At 11 that night, I had just fallen asleep when the sound of a power drill jolted me awake. Was coming from across the hall. Unit 601. The drilling stopped, only to be replaced by the pounding of a hammer. Thud, thud. The vibration made the glass of water on my nightstand tremble. When I was discharged, Dr. Adrian Pike had repeatedly warned me to maintain good sleep. Now that I've been woken up like this, a sharp headache started to build. Suppressing my anger, I opened the door. Their place was brightly lit. Linda's husband, Carl Carver, was hammering nails into the wall. Linda stood in the middle of the living room, casually snacking on chips and directing him. I knocked on her doorframe. She turned and saw me, her eyes lighting up like she'd been waiting for this. "It's almost midnight," I said, frowning. "Can you continue this tomorrow? You're keeping the whole floor awake." She smiled, then called over her shoulder, "Hey, Carl." "She says we're disturbing the whole building." Carl didn't respond and turned back to me. "Listen, sweetheart. I'm not trying to make things difficult for you. If you won't pay that $30,000, and my son still has a wedding to pay for, then we'll just have to save money ourselves. Think of it as making up for what we didn't get from you. If it's noisy, that's your problem. Deal with it." She leaned in closer, lowering her voice. "Or pay up, and we stop immediately. We'll even hire the best contractors and renovate everything quietly for you. How does that sound?" Looking at her utterly self-righteous face, I laughed. Did she really think I was some easy target? I pulled out my phone. "Then I'll call the police." Linda spat a piece of a chip straight at my face and sneered, "Go ahead, I'll be waiting." When the police arrived, Linda suddenly clutched her chest and collapsed into the hallway, her face pale. She pointed at me, gasping for breath. "It's her." She was banging on our door in the middle of the night, pounding on it for minutes. When I opened it, she was glaring at me like a lunatic. "I have a heart condition. I can't handle that kind of shock." Carl rushed out and, without warning, kicked me hard in the stomach. "If anything happens to my wife, I'm not letting you off." Officer Ryan Keller tried to intervene, but it was too late. A sharp pain exploded in my abdomen, forcing me to double over. My vision flickered, going dark at the edges. Officer Keller was about to reprimand Carl, but Linda immediately grabbed onto the officer, crying, "Officer, you have to stand up for me. I'm a heart patient. I can't take being frightened like that." Officer Keller turned to look at me. My whole body trembled with anger, and my heart was racing. It was coming on. I startled myself and quickly took a deep breath. "Officer," I said through clenched teeth, "I have intermittent explosive disorder. It was diagnosed at a top hospital. I have the records at home, and you can verify anytime. My doctor specifically warned me that a lack of sleep can trigger episodes." "I came to knock on their door because they were renovating," I said, pointing at the time on my phone. "They've been at it since 11. Drilling, hammering, moving furniture. The whole building can hear it. I couldn't sleep, so I came to talk." Carl shot to his feet. "What the hell are you talking about? We weren't renovating at all tonight. We went to bed early. You're the one who came banging on our door and scared my wife into a heart attack. That's why we turned the lights on." Lying on the floor, Linda let out a perfectly timed groan. "Oh, my heart." "Officer, they're setting me up," I argued, refusing to back down. Officer Keller looked at them, then at me. He stepped inside their unit to take a look. When he came back out, his expression was complicated. "There's no sign of renovation in there," he said. "Are you sure the drilling came from their place?" "Yes," I said firmly, "but there's no drill in use," he replied. "All their tools are put away." My stomach sank. Then it hit me. In the 20 minutes before the police arrived, they'd had more than enough time to hide everything. Carl looked at me with a smug grin, like there was nothing I could do. Officer Keller let out a sigh. "Miss, I understand how you feel, but situations like this are best resolved through mediation. You're neighbors. You'll see each other every day. Letting things escalate won't do anyone any good." He gave my shoulder a firm pat. "That's enough for tonight. All of you take a step back and get some rest." Officer Keller then left. Linda pushed herself up off the floor and looked at me with satisfaction. "So the police are gone. What else have you got?" I dug my nails into my palm, using the pain to keep the fury inside me from boiling over. She leaned against the door frame, already cracking open a fresh bag of chips. "I've lived here 8 years. You think I haven't dealt with troublemakers before? I can handle a dozen girls like you without breaking us. Photoshopping fake medical records. That's hilarious." She laughed out loud, then tossed a package from inside her apartment toward me. "This yours? Don't thank me. I brought it up for you." It was the new outfit I had ordered. The packaging had been ripped open, and inside the clothes had been cut to shreds, leaving nothing but scraps of fabric. Linda clapped her hands, then stepped right onto the ruined clothes, laughing. "I've already spoken to the delivery guy. From now on, all your packages will come to me first. If anything goes missing or gets damaged, don't blame me. Should have thought about that before buying your place so cheap and making us take the loss." Again and again. She pushed further. I stared at her, my gaze locked. She frowned and snapped. "What are you looking at?" My husband's right inside. Nothing, I said through clenched teeth, my voice low. Just reminding you of something the doctor said. People with my condition shouldn't be provoked. If I get triggered, I lose control. She let out a sharp laugh. Lose control? And what exactly are you going to do with those skinny arms? Could knock you flat with a single slap. I spoke softly.
You can try.
The price of triggering me isn't something you can afford, freak. She snapped, slamming the door shut. She wasn't wrong. Something was wrong with me. Otherwise, I wouldn't have sent a grown man straight into the ICU. During the 2 years I spent in the psychiatric hospital, even the doctors didn't dare raise their voices at me. And now that I was out, I had to put up with this. I tamped my anger down and went back inside, splashing cold water on my face. Then I remembered that I hadn't taken my medication today. I had just stepped into the living room.
Click.
Everything went dark. I thought the power had gone out. Feeling my way through the darkness, I reached for my phone in the living room. Suddenly a sharp pain shot through my knee. I had slammed into the edge of the table. Grimacing, I found my phone and turned on the flashlight, then walked over to the window. Outside, 2 figures stood on the balcony of Unit 601. Linda and Carl were standing on their balcony, looking straight at me. I saw Linda smile and wave. Beside her, Carl held a pair of pliers. They had flipped my breaker. The blood rushed to my head, my heartbeat accelerating again. I was really about to lose it. I hurried back inside, found my medication, and swallowed it. Then I lay down on the bed and closed my eyes. The medicine started to take effect. My heartbeat slowly steadied, my limbs growing heavy. In this world, reason doesn't always matter. The doctor told me to avoid conflict. I had done everything I could.
Tonight.
Tomorrow. It would be their turn to panic, because I was out of medication. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of a drill. I reached for my phone. 6 a.m. I lay there for 3 seconds. The drilling didn't stop. It only got louder. I sat up, irritation rising uncontrollably. I went to the bathroom to wash my face. The person in the mirror looked terrible. My heart started racing again. I needed to get my meds. When I opened the door, a pile of garbage blocked the entrance. Dirty liquid had seeped through the gap under the door, soaking into the entry rug and emitting a sour stench. The door to 601 was shut, but faint laughter came from inside. I knew someone was watching through the peephole. I took a deep breath and said nothing. Squeezing past the pile of trash, I headed out. Getting the medication mattered more. Unfortunately, the nearest pharmacy didn't carry what I needed. When I got back and tried to unlock my door, the key wouldn't go in. I looked down at the keyhole. It was stuffed full with broken toothpicks, jammed inside, packed tight. I crouched down and tried to pick them out with my fingers, but it was useless. Linda. It had to be them again. Anger surged through me. I stood up, took a deep breath, and forced it down. Then I made a call and got a locksmith to come over. It took Mike Donnelly half an hour to dismantle the lock and replace it with a new one. Who'd do something this nasty? Mike muttered while packing up his tools. Stuffing toothpicks in a lock. What kind of grudge is that? I paid him, unlocked the door, and stepped inside. Then I froze. Everything on the tables had been swept onto the floor. The kitchen was even worse. Every bottle, oil, salt, vinegar, had been poured out across the floor in a mess. I rushed into the bedroom. A wooden box lay shattered on the ground. In the middle of it was white powder, scattered everywhere, obviously kicked around. My mother's ash. When she passed, the funeral home had given me that urn. She had told me to keep it so I could look at it when I missed her. I stood in the doorway, staring at the powder. A sharp ringing filled my head. Then nothing. The whole world went silent, except for the abnormal pounding of my own heart. My temples throbbed. I walked over slowly and crouched down. I reached out, then pulled my hand back. I didn't dare touch it. That was my mom. I used to keep her on my nightstand and look at her every night before bed. Sometimes I would talk to her.
Mom.
I found a job today.
Mom.
I bought an apartment. Got it $30,000 below market. If she were still alive, she would have been so happy. Keeping her there made me feel like she was still with me. Now there was nothing left. Pain in my chest was suffocating. Linda. The anger surged through my body, snapping the last thread of restraint.
You push me to this.
I don't start trouble. But if someone crosses me, I won't hold back. You destroyed the one thing I cared about most. You're going to pay for it. I walked into the living room, opened my toolbox and pulled out a large wrench. I weighed it in my hand. Heavy. The iron of the wrench was freezing against my palm, a stark contrast to the burning heat behind my eyes. I stood in the center of my ruined living room, staring at the white powder scattered across the hardwood floor. Some of it had settled into the grooves of the wood. Some of it had been smeared by the dirty sole of a shoe, a ridged, athletic pattern.
Carl's shoe.
My mother's face floated in my mind. Not the sick, pale face from the hospice bed, but the face she wore when we finally signed the papers for this apartment. A place of your own, sweetie, she had whispered, her voice paper-thin but
Warm.
no more landlords. No more moving. You can finally put down roots. I had put down roots, and Linda Carver had dug them up and thrown them in the
Trash.
The ringing in my ears grew louder, a high-pitched, metallic whine that drowned out the distant hum of the city outside. My breathing was shallow. My chest felt tight, as if a steel band were winding around my ribs, squeezing the air out of my lungs. This was the prodrome. Dr. Adrian Pike had spent 18 months teaching me to recognize it. The aura of the storm, he called it. When the blood starts to taste like copper in your mouth, when the skin on your forearms begins to itch. With the urge to tear something apart, you stop. You breathe. You count to 10. I didn't count. I let the steel band tighten. I walked out of my apartment, leaving the door wide open. The hallway was empty, smelling faintly of the cabbage Linda had been boiling for lunch. The door to 601 was closed, its peephole staring at me like a dull, glassy eye. I didn't knock. I raised the wrench and shattered their digital video doorbell. With one clean, heavy stroke, the plastic casing exploded. Wires sparked, a brief blue flash in the dim hallway light. I struck it again, burying the metal nose of the wrench into the plaster until the mounting plate hung limp, dangling by its copper veins. Almost instantly, the heavy deadbolt on 601 clicked. The door swung open and Carl's face appeared, his features twisted in ready-made fury. "What the hell do you think you're?" He stopped. I was standing 3 feet away. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't crying. My arm was hanging at my side, the wrench dripping small flecks of gray plaster onto the
Carpet.
I looked him dead in the eye, and for the first time since I had moved into this building, Carl Carver looked small. "You went inside my home," I said. My voice didn't sound like mine.
It was
Quiet, flat, completely devoid of the tremor that had been there the night before. Linda appeared behind him, her face flushed with excitement, ready to scream for the police. But when she saw the ruined doorbell and the look on my face, the smirk died on her lips. She took a half step back, her hand flying to her throat. "We don't know what you're talking about," Carl said, though his voice lacked the booming authority he had used when he kicked me in the stomach. He glanced down at the wrench, then back up. "You're crazy. You're a certified lunatic. We're calling the cops." "Call them," I whispered. "Tell them to hurry. Get away from our door." Linda shrieked, her voice cracking. "Carl, shut the
door."
"She's got a weapon. If you shut this door," I said, leaning in just enough to make Carl tense, "I will use this wrench to tear the handle off. Then I will break the hinges.
And
then I will find you." It was a threat, clear and simple. In my medical file, this was called loss of behavioral control. In the real world, it was the only language the Carvers seemed to understand. Carl tried to push the door shut, but I wedged the heavy iron head of the wrench into the gap. The wood groaned under the pressure. "The urn," I said, my voice dropping an octave. "The white powder on my bedroom
floor."
"Who did it?" "We don't know anything about your garbage," Linda yelled from the safety of the
hallway.
"You're a freak. You probably did it yourself to frame us." I smiled. It was a terrible, empty feeling, the skin stretching tight over my
teeth.
"We'll see what the forensics team says about the shoe prints in the kitchen oil, Carl. Size 11, right? The ones with the triangular tread on the
Hail?"
Carl's eyes darted down toward his feet. He was wearing slippers now, but I knew the shoes he'd worn. I had seen them on the rack outside his door yesterday. "You're bluffing," Carl muttered, but his knuckles were white on the edge of the
door. "Try me," I said.
"I have nothing left to lose. My mother is gone, my apartment is ruined, and my doctor says I lack the capacity for remorse when I'm triggered. Do you know what that means, Carl? It means if I hurt you, my lawyers will have me back in a comfortable ward within 6 months.
But you'll
still be learning how to eat through a straw." I pulled the wrench out of the door frame. Carl slammed the door so hard the hallway light fixtures rattled. I heard the lock turn, then the chain slide into place, followed by the frantic hushed whispers of 2 people who had suddenly realized they were sharing a floor with a predator. I stood there for a long moment, listening to their panicked breathing through the thin wood. The copper taste in my mouth was fading, replaced by a cold, calculating clarity. They thought they could drive me out with high school bullying and cheap tricks. They thought because I was quiet, I was weak. I turned back to my apartment. I had a phone call to make, but it wasn't to the local police precinct. It was to someone who actually knew how to handle a crime
Scene.
3 hours later, the hallway was no longer quiet. Officer Ryan Keller was back, but this time he wasn't alone. Beside him stood Detective Marcus Vance from the Property Crimes Unit, along with a technician, carrying a black plastic case. "You're sure about the break-in, Miss Vance?" Keller asked, looking uncomfortable. He kept his eyes on the floor, avoiding the shattered remains of the doorbell across the hall. "The locksmith didn't jam the lock, Officer Keller," I said, pointing to the door frame of my unit. "He replaced it because someone had jammed toothpicks into the cylinder. But before they did that, they entered through the balcony.
Door.
I left it unlocked this morning because of the smell of the garbage they left on my welcome mat." Detective Vance, a tall, tired-looking man with graying temples, stepped into my bedroom. He stood over the scattered ashes, his expression darkening. "This is human remains?" Vance asked. "My mother," I said. My voice was tight, but I kept it under control.
She
"Passed away 18 months ago." They broke the urn and kicked her ashes across the floor. Vance knelt, inspecting the wood. "There's shoe prints in the kitchen. Someone stepped in cooking oil and walked through the hallway. And here, in the bedroom, there's a partial print in the ash itself." He looked up at Keller. "This isn't a neighborly dispute anymore, Ryan. This is burglary, malicious mischief, and desecration of venerated objects. That's a felony." Keller's face went pale. "Detective, the neighbors across the hall, they claimed she threatened them with a wrench earlier today." "I did," I said directly. "I told them if they ever entered my home again, I would defend myself. Under state law, I am allowed to use proportional force to prevent a felony intrusion. Given that they had already broken into my home and destroyed my family's remains, I believed my life was in danger." Vance let out a low whistle. "She's got you there, Keller. And frankly, looking at this mess, I'd have grabbed a wrench too." He turned to the technician.
Get
"The prints from the kitchen floor. Then go across the hall and request a voluntary boot print match from Mr. Carver. If he refuses, we'll get a warrant." The technician got to work, pouring a chemical casting agent over the oily footprints in my kitchen. Within 30 minutes, the heavy oak door of 601 opened again. I stood in my doorway, watching as Detective Vance knocked. Carl answered, his face tight and defensive. "I told the officer earlier we don't know anything about a break-in. We were out all morning." "That's fine, Mr. Carver," Vance said smoothly. "We're just doing a routine elimination sweep." The intruder left several very distinct footprints in some spilled canola oil. "If you could just let us take a quick photograph of the soles of the shoes you wore today, we can rule you out." Carl stiffened. "I'm not showing you my shoes without a lawyer." "You don't need a lawyer to clear your name, sir," Vance said, his voice dropping the friendly tone. "But refusing to cooperate when human remains have been desecrated across the hall? That looks very bad. If we have to go to a judge for a search warrant, it won't just be your shoes we're looking at. We'll search the entire apartment for the tool used to break the balcony lock." Linda pushed her way to the front, her face red. "She's setting us up.
She's a
Crazy person. She belongs in an asylum. Ask anyone in the building. She's been running a hooker house in there." "Mrs. Carver," Vance said, turning his cold gaze onto her, "I suggest you stop talking. The resident group chat has already been preserved by our cyber unit. The statements you made regarding Miss Vance's profession, without any evidence, constitute criminal harassment and defamation. If she chooses to press charges, those screenshots are more than enough to indict you." Linda gasped, her hand flying to her chest again. "My heart, Carl, my heart is going." "Save it, Linda," I said from across the hall. Everyone turned to look at me. I was leaning against my doorframe, arms crossed. "The hospital records of your heart condition are public access through the insurance courts, thanks to your 3 personal injury lawsuits over the last decade," I said, reciting the information I had paid an online database $50 to retrieve while waiting for the police. "You have mild hypertension. No arrhythmia, no history of myocardial infarction. You're as healthy as a horse, Linda. You just like the drama." Linda's mouth popped open, but no sound came out. She looked at Carl, but Carl was staring at Detective Vance, who was currently writing something down in his notepad with a small, grim smile. "We'll be back with that warrant, Mr. Carver," Vance said. "Don't leave the building." The next 3 days were quiet, but it was the silence of a trench before a mortar strike. The Carvers didn't use the drill. They didn't hammer on the walls.
When they
Walked down the hallway, they did so on tiptoe, their eyes locked on the floor, terrified of meeting my gaze. But they weren't done. On Thursday morning, I went downstairs to collect my mail. The lobby was empty, except for Denise, the store owner from Harper's Corner Store, who was sorting through a stack of local flyers. She looked up when she heard my footsteps, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and curiosity. "You're still here," she whispered, looking around to make sure no one else was in the lobby. "I paid for the apartment, Denise," I said, opening my mailbox. "I'm not leaving. The Carvers are telling everyone the police are on their side," she said, her voice barely a breath. "They said you threatened them with an iron bar. They're trying to get a petition signed by the building board to have you evicted under the nuisance neighbor clause." I pulled out a stack of envelopes. Among them was a certified letter from the building's management office. Notice of complaint and pending board hearing. I smiled. "Let them try." "You don't understand," Denise said, grabbing my arm. Her hand was shaking. "They've done this before. The couple in 504. They were a young gay couple. Carl and Linda didn't like them. They started rumors, they threw garbage, they even poisoned their dog. The board didn't do anything because Carl's brother-in-law is the president of the HOA. My fingers tightened around the mail. The president of the HOA?
Yeah.
Arthur Pendleton. He lives on the penthouse floor. He's a nasty piece of work, just like them. He'll sign whatever eviction notice they put in front of him. I looked down at the certified letter. The hearing was scheduled for Monday evening in the basement community room. "Thank you, Denise," I said. "Are you going to go?" she asked. "Of course," I said, tucking the letter into my bag. It would be rude to miss my own funeral. When I got back to the 6th floor, I didn't go inside. Instead, I stood in front of 601. I pulled a small, black device from my pocket, a high-resolution, low-light pinhole camera with a local storage card. I mounted it discreetly in the decorative wreath hanging on my own door, angling it perfectly to capture the entire hallway, including their entrance, and the floor where the welcome
must lay.
Then I went to the local hardware store. I didn't buy weapons. I bought 3 industrial-strength floor fans, a roll of heavy-duty plastic sheeting, and 5 gallons of cheap, sulfur-based agricultural fertilizer. If they wanted a war of attrition, they had chosen the wrong opponent.
A
psychiatric hospital isn't just a place where they keep sick people, it's a school of survival. You learn how to make people uncomfortable without ever touching them. You learn how to use the system's own rules to crush the people who run it. I set up the plastic sheeting in my entryway, sealing off the rest of my apartment. Then, I mixed the fertilizer with warm water in a large bucket, creating a thick, muddy slurry that smelled intensely of rotten eggs and decaying organic matter. I placed the bucket directly behind my front door, positioned the 3 industrial fans behind it, and turned them on high, directing the airflow through the gaps in my door frame and straight into the
hallway.
Within 10 minutes, the entire 6th floor smelled like a ruptured sewer line. It wasn't illegal. I was merely preparing my indoor balcony garden for spring planting. If the smell leaked into the common areas, well, that was a ventilation issue for the building management to resolve. At 2 p.m., I heard the door of 601 fly open. "What the fresh hell is that?" Carl's voice boomed through the hallway, followed immediately by a violent fit of coughing. "Oh my God, Carl. It smells like something died," Linda wailed. "It's her.
She's
doing it on purpose." I stood behind my door, listening to them gag. "I'm calling Arthur," Carl choked out. "We're getting her out of here today." Monday evening arrived. The air in the building was still thick with the faint, sour tang of fertilizer, though I had turned off the fans 3 hours prior to the meeting to ensure I looked perfectly reasonable when I walked into the basement. The community room was cold, lit by buzzing fluorescent tubes that made everyone look slightly green. A long folding table sat at one end of the room. Behind it sat 5 people, the building board. In the center was Arthur Pendleton, a man in his late 60s, with a bulbous red nose and an expensive watch that didn't hide his cheap polyester suit. Linda and Carl were already seated in the front row of the audience chairs, looking triumphant. Beside them sat a young man in a cheap rental tuxedo, their son, the groom-to-be. He was staring at his phone, looking thoroughly annoyed too.
Be there.
I walked in quietly, wearing a simple gray knit dress and no makeup. I looked tired, fragile, and entirely harmless. I sat in the back row, placing a small, leather portfolio on my lap. Arthur Pendleton cleared his throat, the sound rattling through the microphone. We are here to discuss a formal complaint filed by the residents of Unit 601 against the owner of Unit 602, Miss Elena Vance. He looked over his glasses at me, his eyes cold. The complaints include maintaining a public nuisance, emitting noxious odors from the premises, verbal harassment, and threatening neighbors with a dangerous weapon. Furthermore, there have been numerous reports of suspicious activity indicating the operation of an unlicensed business from the unit. She's a hooker, Linda yelled from the front row. She's bringing men in at all hours. Mrs. Carver, please, Pendleton said, though his tone was entirely devoid of
Actual reprimand.
let the board present the evidence. He turned to me. Miss Vance, how do you respond to these allegations? I stood up slowly. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't look angry. Regarding the accusation of running an unlicensed business, I have my tax returns from the last 3 years here. I pulled a document from my portfolio. I am a freelance database architect for several healthcare firms. I work from home. The men Mrs. Carver saw entering my apartment were my delivery driver, my locksmith, and Detective Marcus Vance of the City Police Department. A murmur went through the other 3 board members. As for the noxious odor, I continued, I was preparing organic soil for my indoor plants. I apologized to the building superintendent yesterday and have since moved the materials to an off-site storage unit. It was an oversight and I take full responsibility. And the wrench, Carl shouted, standing up. You gonna take responsibility for threatening to crack my skull open? Mr. Carver, I said, turning to look at him with a soft, pitying expression. You entered my apartment while I was out. You destroyed my mother's ashes. The police have already taken cast mold prints of your athletic shoes from the spilled oil in my kitchen. Detective Vance informed me this morning that the district attorney is preparing a warrant for your arrest on charges of felony, burglary, and desecration. The room went dead silent. Arthur Pendleton's face went from red to a mottled, dusty purple. He looked at Carl, who had suddenly gone very quiet, and sat back down. That is a matter for the courts, Pendleton stammered, trying to regain control of the room. The board is concerned with the safety of this community. We have a signed petition from 12 residents on the 5th and 6th floors, stating they feel unsafe with you living here. I'm sure you do, Mr. Pendleton, I said. But before you vote on my eviction, I'd like to present a piece of evidence of my own. I opened my portfolio and pulled out a laptop. I connected it to the room's outdated projector, which was usually used for showing budget slides. This is footage from the hallway camera I installed on my door last Friday. I
said.
On the screen, a high-definition video began to play.
The timestamp read
Saturday, 3:14 a.m. The hallway was dark, but the camera's infrared lens caught everything in crisp, glowing gray. The door to 601 opened. Carl Carver stepped out, wearing a pair of dark sweatpants and no shirt. In his hand, he held a plastic jug. He walked over to my door, unscrewed the cap, and began pouring a thick, dark liquid along the bottom of my door frame, the dirty grease from their kitchen fryer, which had seeped into my carpet over the weekend. But he wasn't alone. A moment later, Arthur Pendleton appeared on the screen, holding a key ring. He handed a key to Carl, who used it to unlock the common utility closet next to my unit, the one containing the main water valves for the entire 6th floor.
Carl
reached in and turned the valve, shutting off the water to my apartment. On the video, Arthur Pendleton could be heard laughing. That'll make the crazy bitch pack her bags. His voice came through the laptop speakers clear as a
bell.
The 3 other board members sat frozen. One of them, an elderly woman named Mrs. Higgins, let out a sharp gasp. This is a violation of state tenant laws, housing discrimination, and conspiracy to commit criminal harassment, I said, my voice remaining perfectly level. Mr. Pendleton, as a board member, you used your master keys to assist a tenant in vandalizing my property and disrupting my utility services. That is not just a violation of the HOA bylaws, it is a federal civil rights violation. Arthur Pendleton looked like he was about to have a real heart attack. He gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles turning white. This video is doctored. It's an invasion of privacy. You can't record the hallway. Actually, I can, I replied. The hallway is a common area with no expectation of privacy under state law, and the camera was mounted on my own property.
I
Have already sent a copy of this footage to the City Housing Authority, the police department, and my attorney. I closed my laptop and packed it away. I bought my apartment for $220,000, I said, looking at the board. The current market value is $250,000. If this board votes to evict me tonight, my attorney will file a $1.2 million lawsuit against the HOA and each of you individually for targeted harassment, emotional distress, and conspiracy. I don't think your insurance covers criminal acts by board members, Mr. Pendleton. The board members looked at each other in sheer panic. Mrs. Higgins turned to Pendleton, her voice shaking with anger. Arthur, what did you do? You told us she was dangerous. You didn't say you were helping them. Lock her out. I was just trying to protect the building. Pendleton whispered, his eyes darting toward the exit. This meeting is adjourned, Mrs. Higgins said, slamming her folder shut. And, Arthur, you're off the board. Effective immediately. The Carvers' world fell apart with spectacular speed over the next 3 weeks. The arrest warrant for Carl Carver was signed on Tuesday morning. 2 police cruisers arrived at the building, their red and blue lights painting the brick facade. Carl was led out of the lobby in handcuffs, his head bowed, while several neighbors watched from their windows. He was charged with third-degree burglary, criminal mischief, and desecration of venerated remains. Because of the video evidence showing his coordination with Arthur Pendleton, the district attorney refused to offer a plea deal that didn't include jail time. With Carl in jail awaiting trial, the Carver family's financial house of cards collapsed. The son's wedding, which they had been bragging about for months, was abruptly canceled. The bride's family, upon learning of Carl's arrest and the impending civil lawsuits, pulled their funding and broke off the engagement. Linda Carver was left alone in 601. Without Carl's income and with the threat of my lawsuit looming over her, she could no longer afford the mortgage. A for sale sign appeared in the lobby window. The price was set at $250,000. Nobody called. Prospective buyers who researched the building found the pending litigation against the HOA and the police reports associated with the 6th
floor.
2 weeks later, the price dropped to $220,000. Still nothing. Finally, in late May, the bank initiated foreclosure proceedings. The apartment was sold at a public auction for $180,000, exactly $40,000 less than what Linda had paid for it during the market peak and $10,000 less than what I had paid for mine. On the day she was forced to move out, I stood on my balcony, watching the movers carry her faded velvet sofa and cheap particle board dressers down to a waiting truck. Linda stood by the truck, her tight curls looking limp and gray in the morning sun. She looked up at my balcony and saw me. There was no anger left in her eyes, only a deep, hollow exhaustion.
She had
tried to bully a woman she thought was weak, only to find she had poked a sleeping giant. I raised my coffee mug in a silent toast. A month later, the building was peaceful. The new neighbor in 601 was a quiet, polite young man named David, who worked as a high school librarian. He brought me a plate of homemade chocolate chip cookies the day he moved in, apologizing in advance if his cat made too much noise running down the hallway. I told him not to worry about it. My living room had been completely restored. The floor had been sanded and resealed, the lingering smell of grease and fertilizer entirely gone. On my nightstand sat a new urn. It was made of hand-blown glass, swirled with deep blues and whites, like the ocean on a clear summer day.
inside what
Remained of my mother's ashes had been carefully gathered and placed within a silk pouch. Beside the urn was a small, framed photo of her. I picked up my phone and dialed Dr. Pike's office. Elena, his voice came through the line, warm and professional.
How are you?
Doing? I saw the news about your neighbor. I'm fine, doctor, I said, looking out the window at the city skyline.
I
Didn't lose control. You didn't. No, I said, a small smile touching my lips. I kept my heart rate under 90 the entire time. I took my medication every day. I reasoned it out. I'm proud of you, Elena, Dr. Pike said. You handled a very difficult situation with remarkable restraint. Thank you, doctor, I said. But I think I learned something else too. What's that? Sometimes, the best way to handle the monsters in the world isn't to fight them, I said, running a finger over the smooth glass of the new urn. It's just to let them see what happens when they try to break you. I hung up the phone. The afternoon sun filtered through the window, casting a warm, golden glow over the room. I took a deep, clean breath. I was home. And for the first time in my life, I was finally at peace.